You got to say that to stay here. I said, I got to start off with a lie? Just didn't sound right. Even in my diction, it just didn't sound right for me to lie, to get help. The two didn't balance. So I sat there and all I could hear was old men drinking coffee. No offense, y'all, I'm getting old, so, drinking coffee with cigarettes in their hand. They got a big old recovery Bible and all that on there. I'm like, oh, no. And I see the Bible, first thing I got is this fear of just punishing God. So fear don't say that. I said, I'm getting the fuck out of here. I'll be out in the hall. Where I make my meetings that they have, it ain't fellowship upstairs, right? It ain't meeting. So I'm standing there and this girl walked by, I used to date. She said, where you going? She said, I'm going to this meeting. The meeting was. She said, NA meeting. I said, what's that? Because I never heard of Narcotics Anonymous. She said, it's NA meeting. Go upstairs. So just being, little hot motherfucker I am, I follow on upstairs, right? Yeah, baby, I follow you. When I sat down, the meeting was getting ready to open, and they read the literature, the opening literature, who was an addict. And it hit me. I said, oh. They told me why y'all were here. I said, well, they got that much of a problem. I hang out with them for a while. See if I can help a few of them. Maybe they, look, they can't manage their own life. They dawned on me. I was such denial that, look, they ain't bad to hang around. I can't be no worse than these folks, all right? And then y'all told me about the program. And it just touched me in such a way. I missed that part about, didn't nobody mention it that day that suggested 90-90. So I said, I'll be back next week. So I went out, I left, I felt good, and I came back a week later. Now meanwhile, I don't have this little baby, right? She's a little tiny thing, all right? And I'm sitting there, and I'm still not knowing what to do, So I come back a week later, and I hear this 90-90. I said, wow. Maybe I try that. Nah, fuck it. I'll go back next week again. Somehow the seed had got planted, I'd already met this guy at this drug treatment program. I was on methadone, and he had told me something about I was counting the, stopping and not to use it. And I was like, damn. And it caught me too, and I was worried, he hadn't told me he was an addict or nothing. He was just the counselor thing, right? So I came back another week later, and I just surrendered. Something happened. I don't know what it was. They just said, man, you ought to be tired. Give yourself a break. So I went to make these meetings. I'm sitting there. I'm still looking for this reason to separate myself from y'all, okay? I don't really want to be there. I'm looking for a reason. So I'm making my 90-90. Now, we suffer from a disease that's progressive, incurable, and fatal. So now I'm going to tell y'all who the boss is. Fatal. He's the Don. He's the killer. All right, now I hung with killers on the street, and they made me very uncomfortable. All right, in active addiction, we fuck with a lot of people, and there was some killers around, and I didn't like being around killers. So when Fatal was with me when I first started making meetings, and I could tell because one day I opened my mouth to say something about the addict at home. I had never shared this. And when I did, the feedback I got was all fucked up. You better get out of there. You better leave her. Nobody told me where to go. Nobody said you can come stay with me. Nobody said what was going to happen to this baby. Man, you better take care of yourself first and get up out of there. Now I'm new. What am I going to do after baby? No. Where am I going to live? I ain't got no job. Man, you ain't going to make it. These are the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous. So now I'm ready to leave Narcotics now. I say, okay. Everybody, now Fatal don't got loose. He don't come up in there, he don't whisper to everybody here, and everybody's sharing. You get them days where everybody got a problem with no solution. And I said something to somebody looked at me going on. I ain't that humble. You just ain't going to keep hollering at me, okay? So I'm really ready to go now. So I'm sitting there, I say, all right, fuck this shit. I'm out of here. So this guy had met at this treatment center, right? It had talked to her. They gave me this ride one time and told me about the count to stop it and not to use it. He didn't tell me he was an addict. So he walked in the room, right? And the room was I was ready to go. I was out of here. He came in the room. And he came in, and I said, I noticed something different about him that day. Just pure, but then everybody else. And he walked over there, and he spoke to somebody, and then that person smiled. And that person went over there and talked to somebody else and whispered, and that person smiled. And I looked around, the atmosphere changed. People were smiling. So I went over there, and I went to say something to him. I said, hey, man, how you doing? And the guy said, meeting going on. He looked back at the guy and said, like, I don't know where I'm at. Thank you. He explained the third tradition to me about, we come and go as we please. We know we're in a meeting. You know, and that day is like Fatal got arrested. You know, it said they arrested Aziz, he got locked up, you know, and that's that got to be my sponsor. You know, and he generally had to tell somebody he's going to pray on it or he's going to call you back, right? He told me immediately, yeah. It's like he knew and I knew, you know, what our purpose was. So now I got a sponsor. So I don't put Fatal in jail. Now, I'm going to play a little fun with this. Now, if Fatal's in jail, now he got a crew, okay? And I call the crew the Three Stooges. You know, now I call Larry and Curly cunning and baffling. All right, so I'm walking around in this, I'm living in this first step. Life is just, I'm tremendous, I'm powerless. I ain't got no job. Life, I don't come to accept the fact that drugs don't fuck me up. You know what I mean? That I failed as a drug user. You know? The jails and institutions just took over my life. I don't been to prison twice. You know what I mean? That drugs have turned me into somebody I didn't want to be. You know, that I'd been on methadone 12 times. You know, that life had just really got to be a bitch, period. And I couldn't do it by myself. You know, in that first step, I remember that the woman I was living with, she was still using. And my sponsor told me to read the Third Tradition. And it gave me some relief at that moment. He didn't tell me nothing else about leave her, go this, that. He said, read the Third Tradition. You know, and that's what I did. It gave me some relief. I said, I'm going to break this motherfucker, though. It's the Third Tradition, I'm going to break it. I'm going to prove it wrong. And that was my plan. You know, and as I tried that, I went home, I read it. And I went home, and it says that we can be analyzed, counseled, reasoned, with prayed, or threatened, beaten, locked up. See, I'll start with analyzing. I got me some books and tried to analyze them. Like I'm a therapist, right? Sit down with, next day she used. I said, maybe I ain't got enough literature. So I went and got my books, I'm a counselor. Next day she used. Like every time I tried something, she used. So I said, let me reason with you a little bit. You know what I mean? If you just go to a meeting now and then, she went to one meeting. She used. So in the meeting, we get a little mixed up in the meeting sometime, right? Somebody say, pray over for 2 weeks. Guarantee you she'll stop using. I like Tina Turner, y'all. Zing, zing, I got the whole thing working. When she didn't stop using in 2 weeks, I went to threatening and beating her, all right? I was just gone, And at this time, like I said, I still ain't got no job. She don't sold my car. I'm really in a hopeless, helpless situation. I don't know what to do. It's like cunning and baffling. Like Larry and Curly just don't beat up my head. You know what I mean? They just don't work me to death. I don't have a clue. I'm living this thing. I'm living this powerlessness. I don't know how to cope with this. The second step says we came to believe in the power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And the means I used to hear people talk about the sanity, how they got sane. Well, that's not what the second step was about to me. And I ain't trying to tell you how to work the program. On the first page of it, Works How and Why, it mentions the word hope, I think, about 7 times. And it tells us that this is what we need to continue on this program, hope. It tells us in the literature that we can get this power grid ourselves can be a lot of things. It can be, a person, it could be the group, it could be the literature. To me, it was the evidence. See, based on the evidence of my life, there was something with me prior to coming to narcotics. Now, when them 2 brothers died in my place, you see what I mean? Instead of me looking at that as a punishment, that was a power greater than myself working for me, keeping me alive for a purpose, you see. So that was my hope right there, the evidence in my life, that God was there before I even knew what was going on. And this evidence became my hope. And this gave me a little more hope to go on. It gave me hope to walk to meetings when I had 7, 8 miles. Sometimes I get to the meeting there, they'd be closing. I mean, thank you, I got here, here I went from riches to rags, like I said, I've been a drug dealer all my life. I needed something to help me cope with this, and meetings did it for me. Just making meetings and just knowing that something was with me helped me make it, As I went on trying to break this Third Tradition, it says in the literature that, it says perhaps because you may not have to go through this, it said, but the most difficult thing that we may have to deal with in our recovery is that we are as powerless over someone else's addiction as well as our own. Literature tells us that if we let them go, make their own decisions now, that if they become the authority on their own life, we can all be the authority on our own. I couldn't do that at first. Somewhere along the line, I was in my third step. Now, I know a lot of people get in the third step and they say they turned their life over and this, that, and the other. To me, I call it a spiritual theory at that point. I couldn't do it. I would say I'm going to turn something over, and was going to run to the meeting and tell y'all how I turned it over. And by the time I got to the meeting, I got it back. You know what I mean? I could never. I'd call somebody and say, I turned that over. I got it back. Somewhere along the line, I needed to try to practice this theory, this good idea, I call it. My sponsor said, I had to do something. I said, what? He said, just something. Something's bothering you, you got to do something. You know, for this theory to work, I had to do something. And an opportunity presented itself. You know, one day she disappeared with the little baby, you know, and I didn't know. Now, if cunning and baffling is the two of the stooges, you know about Mo, right? Mo come out and slap the shit out of both of them, say, you gave them some hope. You let him get some hope. Come out, poke him, and like, you know how you do the Three Stooges. You know, you don't give this man some hope. So here come Insidious, y'all. Cunning, baffling, Insidious. Insidious is Mo. And for me, Mo would whisper to me. You know what I mean? He wouldn't be this, have me all clouded. He would whisper, and his tool was fear. He whispered dead into my heart. Not into my head, into my heart. He told me my baby was dead when I hadn't seen her in 2 days. And I believed him. You see what I mean? I was believed him. Everything was a lie, and I didn't know what to do. I went to my sponsor's house. We was having a sponsee meeting. And I was caught up in fear. You know, when fear gets me, I get angry. You know, I want to hurt everybody because I'm hurt. So they was sharing, and they was, well, this was, shut up. You know what the fuck you talking about. You know, you been there, you done this? You know, and if I just about attacked all my brothers, right? You know, just murdered him. He's still mad, y'all. He's still mad, y'all. He ain't got over it yet, okay? You know, my sponsor looked at me. You know, and I remember the way he spoke to me, so calm, right? And he said, well, you know, she got a new car, right? Yeah. He said, well, she just gone out with a friend still or whatever. She'll be home tonight. Baby be a little dirty, but it'll be okay. And I grabbed that, y'all. You know, as if he was a prophet. I grabbed it because that's all I had. I didn't have nothing else to grab. And I grabbed it, you know, just for that moment. And it happened just like he said. You know? And after that, I got a little courage to do something. You know? I left. I told my baby I'd be here every day all the time. And I moved from there to my cousin's house who was still using. But by then, I got this third tradition. See, it didn't bother me what y'all was doing no more. You know, he was in there with her boy, and they was going through it, but it didn't bother me no more. You see what I mean? I got a little courage out of this. You know, and I left, and I hadn't worked, and I never did any hard work in my life. And this job showed up, they said, well, you know, this real hard labor job. You know, I had to cut my nails. You know, I mean, this was, you know, and I said, I got a little more courage, and I took this hard-ass job. You know, and I remember sitting there the first day at lunchtime saying, I just holding on to the chair saying, you can't, you got, you know, some said, go on back in there and go to work. I can't go, I'm just holding on, leave this place, I can't go, I'm not, you know, it just, someone was screaming and cities was telling me to get there. I got you can't do this. The job got so simple to me, it was pathetic. You know, about 11:30 I was through, everybody was still at work. You know, that little courage took me a long way, you know. I was able to do a lot of things with that little courage, that theory, that good idea, you know, to turn some things over. You know, I hadn't fully got to it. You know, when I left, she didn't stop using. And it's okay for her to use. It's important to her right now. You know, I've gotten better at not, you know, I came back, I got my baby right quick. I got my own place. I got little things going. You know, life got a little better simply because I didn't use. You know, she got better at being a mother more often. I don't force on her. I used to say it's your turn to keep this baby. You have to do it. That's no. See, I didn't have a purpose. And that day when I went to the abortion clinic, God gave me one. You see what I mean? He gave me a purpose, and all I do is pay attention. You know, that child's everything to me. You know what I mean? I mean, it's been a lot of lonely nights and a lot of time by myself, just me and her. But I've been grateful. As I was driving up here, I was riding, I looked in the back, and she was asleep. And a feeling came over me. See, you know, you got your baby with you, and y'all going out of town.
That's right.
You know, and you got everything in the world you need right in this car. You know what I mean? You don't have to have no wife, no woman, no everything right now I got in that car, and it was right there in that seat. You know, now she was asleep, which is a good thing, because, you know, when she woke, you know, I really love her when she sleeps, y'all. I mean, you know, I love her to death then. when she sleep, I really love her, y'all. But no, I found purpose in life, and I understand now, that this is something greater than me is using me, and it's okay. My fifth step revealed to me that I don't have to turn it over. All I got to do is accept life as it is. There's something that's going to take me right where I got to go. And that's where I'm in my recovery now. My sponsor talks about, he says, he's one of them that don't believe you're going to be tested, right? Well, my personal experience is different than his, right? And I'm one that believe that, God tests those he loves the most, he tests the most. That's just my belief. And I believe anybody in Narcotics Anonymous, God loves the most. All right? So you look around you, there's the evidence of those still out there. So surely you don't think you won't be tested. And I keep coming back.
Okay. Next, we're going to hear from our next speaker, Matt. All right.
Well, hello everyone. I'm an addict named Matt, and it's good to be here today. God is good today. I was sitting over there a few minutes ago and almost started crying. Usually I don't do that till the end of the weekend, but man, I'm so grateful today. Scared. I know that it's an awesome power. This is a power greater than myself. But man, I grew up in a pretty screwed up household like many of us. I didn't know how to cope. I knew how to cop. I grew up most of my life copping instead of coping, running because I was scared. Always grew up, I was no good, Even my family told me that. My brother, I don't remember much of my childhood. I remember this scar, that scar, and then John F. Kennedy got shot. And I was only 2 when he got shot. And, I don't remember up till I started using. That's when I start remembering my life, But I grew up running my whole life. I had no teachers. Nobody taught me how to live, how to cope and handle and how to live real life, So I had to do it on my own. I like that reading today, I survived the only way I knew how, and did a lot of running, and that's what I grew up using. And I grew up a long time, I went to a treatment center when I was pretty young, and they told me I had an addiction problem, and yeah, right, I didn't use that much, and it wasn't until recently, I found out what the disease of addiction is, it's not how much or what I used, it's what it did to me when I used it, That was my escape, was drugs. And I grew up most of my life, being pretty successful. I dealt, so I didn't have to pay for it, I always had the best shit in town, and, it was fun at first, but then it got to be to where it wasn't any fun anymore, and I did become my best customer. And, I remember isolating in my own house, locking the bathroom door, and I'm home all alone, scared to answer the phone, scared to answer anything. I got married, I had 2 beautiful children, and both of them had, learning disabilities. And, needless to say, I ended up getting a divorce because didn't know how to, cope. We did the best we could. And today, by the grace of God, I'm not using today, but she still is. And I tried, in our readings, it tells us, many of us tried psychiatry and, other methods, and I tried that. And they worked. I had a lot of anger, a lot of rage, so I went to rage classes. everybody in the age classes, they're court ordered, and I'm here on my own, you know. People are looking at me and like, hey, what are you doing here, you know? And, you know, I was honestly trying to do something different, you know, but I was still using drugs. You know, I didn't think that was a problem because I was pretty successful at it. I'd use a drug till it, you know, people started saying something about it, I'd change another drug. So I did a lot of substitution, you know. I remember I was really proud. I hadn't drank for a year and a half, but I was doing cocaine every day, you know. And in my own mind, I was seriously, you know, I'm doing good, you know. But, you know, the day I saw undercover guys outside the window, that's the day I quit selling. And started having to buy the stuff, you know. And I lasted a while, but it, you know, it got pretty unmanageable. You know, and I didn't know, I never heard about NA. You know, my therapist asked me to go to ACOA, Adult Children of Alcoholics, which, you know, sounded good. I qualified. My mom and dad both drank, you know, my whole life. You know, and that's where I started, and it was acceptable. You know, so I tried it, you know, and I felt really welcome. You know, I felt like I was, you know, so I learned a little bit about the 12 steps, you know, and then when I did go through the divorce, you know, it was luckily I did have some 12-step, you know, program behind me, because I probably wouldn't be here today. You know, I'd be in prison, and my kids would be, you know, have no parents. So, you know, I'm really grateful for that program, and, you know, it kept me alive, kept me able. I was much more accepting of life, but I still didn't stop, you know. And then same day my wife told me she wanted a divorce was same day my mom found out she had breast cancer. And it was about a year later my mom had died, and I was divorced, you know, and I went 18 months without using, you know, and still pretty miserable, you know, and I didn't have, you know, a program to teach me how to stop using. So needless to say, everything all went bad, so I went back using, and ultimately I ended up here, and you know, it was by the grace of God. God loves me, because I've been through some stuff that I can't, you know, I look back and I don't know why I'm alive, you know, and I try not to question that, but I know I'm here, and you know, I went through treatment, and they told me I had to go to 2 outside meetings, you know, so I started going. I also had somebody come in from H&I to share. You know, that was a big factor in me being here. And, you know, I started going to meetings, and started going to more meetings, and somebody suggested 90 and 90, you know, and I did that. And, you know, I started feeling better about myself, you know, and things started working, you know, started looking really good, you know, and I thought I had it, you know, I thought I was pretty well cured. And I remember going around to some old friends, and I remember going over to my dealer's house, and he had a gun up to his head, you know, he was in really a lot of pain, you know, and I'm here trying to save this guy, you know. I got a thing for you, man, you go to NA, you know, as I'm buying some for him. I said, it really works, you know, and I remember walking out with a rock. And, you know, so I wasn't really honest with myself. You know, I didn't really want to stop using, but I wanted something different. And I didn't know what or how. But the more I came around, you know, the more I started seeing some hope in the people. And I met a friend down in Isnac this year, and I saw him again last weekend at a camp out. And I can really relate to what he said. He was talking about for a long time he could admit it. And then he finally could accept it. But it wasn't until he surrendered. You know, that's when things started happening. And I remember going out after I got off probation. I was like, well, I can use now and not get in trouble. You know, so I started drinking. You know, rationalized, well, it's only alcohol, it's legal, and if I stay home, I'll be all right. You know, started out that way, and a month later I was on my knees crying, and I was like, I need help, I can't do it, you know. And that was my point of clarity, moment of, you know, clarity. And I knew I was powerless. And that's where my recovery started, you know. because I faked my way through recovery, you know, knowing that other 12-step stuff. So, you know, the facilitator, I could pretty well bullshit her, you know. But until I got around these addicts, and I couldn't do that anymore, you know. You know, and today I've learned how to cope. You know, I can ask for people's help. You know, I could never do that alone. You know, I could never humble myself to do that. You know, and that's what this program is about, one addict helping another. It is without parallel. And, you know, my life, and that reading is talking about my life, you know, your life changing. You know, I used to be a real good person when I was a young kid. I remember, you know, somewhere that disease took over and ruled my life, you know. And I didn't go to prison. I was in jail for a little length of time, but, you know, I was a prisoner of my own self, you know. And I didn't know how to get out of there. And this 12-step program has shown me how to live. You know, I got this shirt on, and I could really relate a new way of life, you know, a new way to live. That's what ANA is about. And last weekend somebody was talking about, you know, it gave me a life, you know, because I had no life, you know. Out there I wasn't living, I was dying, you know, and today I'm living. And it's because of you people in here helping, you know, teaching me how to live. I've been going through a lot of trouble with money lately, my job, you know, and I haven't had to cop, you know, but I have had a hard time coping, you know. But I know today if I'm using, I'm definitely going to be losing. You know, I must abstain. So, you know, the people in my life today, I have true friends in my life today. You know, I've been to meetings out of state, you know, out in Texas, you know. I walk into this place and I feel like I'm at home, you know. A room full of addicts, man. You know, I don't even know them, but I know them, you know, from the heart. And it's amazing how this program works, you know. God is good to me today, you know, and it's really neat to see other people that's been around for a while. You know, I was at ISNAC, and I had an addict see me at a basic retreat the year before, and I didn't have much time in, you know, and he was really surprised to see me. He came up to me and gave me a really big hug, and he said, "Man, I didn't think you'd make it." You know, but I don't want to have to go back to that that hell I was in, you know. I have found a new way of life, and I don't want to give it up, you know. It's God-given, you know. Yeah, sure, I got a late start on life, but, man, I got my whole life in front of me, you know. And I'm really, truly grateful to be here, and I'll pass. That's all I got.
Okay, can we give our speakers, both of them, another hand? We're going to open the floor up for sharing. We have a few minutes left. But before we do that, I'd like to remind everyone that we are being taped. If you wish not to be taped, please let me know so that the tape can be turned off. Floor is yours. The topic is coping, not copping. I'm sharing later, brother. I'm hanging on to man. Come on.
Sponsor here too, man. Hello, family. My name is Donald Hammond Addict. I got a long wind too, but I got a little bit of integrity today. You know, I respect myself as well as other members who probably need to relieve themselves or find some relief. Thanks for sharing. What's your name again? Thanks for sharing, Mark and Matt. I really got a lot out of what you guys shared on your experience, strength, and hope. Coping, not copping. I can really relate to what you guys are talking about. Coping skills is something that the last part is what makes it difficult for me, because it's telling me that I had to be skillful at it. Coping skills, I got to be skillful. That means I got to have little techniques on how to deal with certain situations until I was introduced to the 12 Steps of Narcotics Anonymous. And I accepted them freely to where I was able to start coping with little things. I was recently in a relationship that, and I had to say this too, that I had to give thanks to my God, and I'm grateful to have Narcotics Anonymous reintroduce me to a God that I can have for myself, my personal use, so I can have my personal contact with this God that I understand. But I just was able to start coping here recently with the understanding of a relationship ending. And man, I went through it. I got 8 years clean and no steps in my life. Been perpetrating that I can get this thing. I can be a chameleon. I can go around here parakeeting. I can, and plus I went to a small town where they didn't know me. And I just come from a big city, and I can hear real well, and I can fake real well. And eventually what happened was somebody took interest in this facade, this masquerade I had going of recovery. And when I got into this relationship, not using dope, because the dope used to have me comfortable in whatever relationship I was in. I knew I can be more cunning and manipulative in these relationships to where they'll never see me. But without the dope, who you see me. And eventually this relationship ended. But man, it's a weird thing being in a relationship and you ain't got that dope with you no more. You got to deal with those feelings. And I had to deal with those feelings, And it's funny how when you read that text, it gives you information on how others have got through similar situations and how you go to meetings and you get nurtured and you get comforted and you get assured that you're going to be all right. But I wanted this program so bad, with 8 years clean. Had a sponsor, but I had a relationship with a sponsor. It was like this. Hey, how you doing? I'm doing all right. What's going on up there where you at? Not much. Look here, let's talk about working some steps. Well, I'll call you next week. Click up. That'll be it. That'll be the extent of our conversation. Did a 4-step, I thought, on the telephone. And it was like, okay, I did a 4-step, yeah. And I was really hurting. I had nothing to hold on to, no spiritual principles other than the ones I used to have when this relationship ended, something that I had substituted for as being a need for me to recover. I don't need to recover. I can put my life that I have into this relationship, and that's what I did. But when it was over, I started seeing some glimpses of the ugly side of my addiction. And I ran from this place that I was at, where this relationship was ongoing. It was ongoing for about 3 years. I talked to a guy one night. I had been seeing this guy around, and matter of fact, at our first convention in this little town I was in, he came and he did a workshop. And I introduced him, and I never met the guy but this first time. And when he got up there to share, he thanked me for introducing him real well and giving him a good build-up. And I never knew this guy, you know. And as he shared, I realized it was something missing in my recovery. And what he was sharing about, I knew it was that part of what he was sharing about was missing in my recovery. And I was in this relationship during that time. And when I got out of this relationship, well, forced out of this relationship, I got to keep things real. I remember this guy, and I remember getting his number and everything, and we talked on the phone. And I saw him again, and we did a workshop together. And I went before him in the workshop. And I'm like, I did a workshop. I was forced to do this workshop, and I did this workshop. And he came behind me, he did his portion of the workshop. And I listened to that tape, I say, man, is that me? Listen to all that chaotic stuff going on, man. I know that nobody getting none out of that but gratitude. Man, this dude is messed up. Then I heard this guy share after me on the tape, and then I got some hope. You know, I really got some hope, you know, and I got with this brother about 2 months after that. The relationship was ended, and I asked him to be my sponsor. He told me the most spiritual thing at that time for me was that first I got to pray on it, then I got to talk to my sponsor, and I get back with you in 2 weeks. Now, mind you, my thing was I was